Welcome to this episode of Your Cup of Counsel. We're talking this time about surveillance of all types, whether it's in the workplace or on the street. It's a topic that applies to everyone. We're also drinking delicious coffee from Cafe Sebastian.
Camera.
Anjay.
Everyone is watching, listening, our devices, everywhere we go. I feel like we're constantly being surveilled. Let's talk about surveillance in the workplace in particular, what employers can listen in on, what they can record, what are the laws?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot. A lot of people are curious about how much their employers are allowed to watch them. So, if they're in the hallway at work, are they allowed to be videotaped? What can the employer use that for if anything ever were to come up? If there's a break room or a bathroom or a change room, can you be filmed there? Basically, the law is, and this is clear in a statute, it's a labor code statute. It says if an employee has a reasonable expectation of privacy, so if it's a private area in the workplace, like a bathroom or a locker room, any kind of video or audio filming is not okay. So, I mean, makes sense, right? I would say if there's ever any inkling that you are being filmed in the bathroom or in the locker room, that would probably be a reason to talk to a lawyer pretty much right away.
Makes sense.
For obvious reasons.
Yeah.
Because, you and I both are aware of certain lawsuits that have been filed against employers who are filming women in the bathroom, for example. And that gives rise and implication to all kinds of sexual harassment type claims. So that's the basic law. Are they allowed to film you in public places? Yes. So if you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy, if it's a break room or a hallway or you're, a public space of some kind, then video surveillance is generally okay.
Do they have to tell you if there's cameras, or is it just enough that you're at the entrance of the business, even if the camera is not readily apparent? Do they have to give you a written warning or anything?
I don't think there's a requirement that they give you a written warning. And what I tell people usually is, generally speaking, and usually this comes up with laptops or phones, like employer provided cell phones, things like that. Even if you're using those once in a while to do personal things, you cannot expect that any of that is your property, right? That is still your employer's property. So you have to treat it that way, and also treat it as though it will be found and searched by your employer. There's been some cases around this. There was one case that actually went up to the U.S. Supreme Court that had to do with police officers being given phones and them texting. And it was, I guess, the provider, it was a per text charge. So the employer had all these charges, and they ended up going and looking through all the text messages, finding some sexually explicit text messages, and firing the employee. And the big question was, did the employer overstep by
looking at the text messages?
Yeah, exactly. And basically it was found that no, the employer didn't, because they had a business justification for doing it. And because it was partly because it was a workplace device, the employee didn't have a reasonable expectation that content would be private.
Okay. So anything in the workspace, unless it's a private area, nursing room, bathroom. What about your private office?
I mean, if you have a reasonable expectation of privacy, that's the legal term that they use, and that is very fact specific. So it would just depend on, is it an open cubicle? Is it an office with a lock on it? Are you doing private things in the, I'm sure there are a lot of different facts that could come up around that. But I want to make a distinction too. Audio is a different thing. So So if you're recording somebody's audio, California is what's called a two-party state, which means both parties have to have consent. If the other party has to have consent if you're going to record them. That's true in the employment space too, but it usually only is true for what's considered a private conversation. So again, that gets into facts around, does the person consider it to be private? And then you would need consent. If you're in a public space and someone's recording you and there's a bunch of people around, there's a stronger argument that you've already kind of consented because you're in a public place with a bunch of other
Interesting.
people.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's generally how it works. But when it comes to texts and emails, the best rule of thumb is just don't expect that you own those. Expect that they're discoverable by your employer. And the best rule of thumb is just not to put anything in there that you wouldn't want your employer to see at some point.
Got it. Okay. So anywhere in the office building, I can be surveilled. My devices can be surveilled. I've heard even instances recently where people are being called back into the office. We've been working remote because of COVID. And then post COVID, there was kind of this grace period where people were still allowed to be at home.
Mm-hmm.
And now seemingly everyone's being called back into the office. And employers are trying to come up with ways to enforce that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, I don't know if it's a myth, but I've heard is that employers are tracking IP devices and logins to ensure that people are like on campus. How is that happening from like data tracking? Is that something that employers can do?
Yeah, I haven't. I don't know. I don't have firsthand knowledge about whether that's happening. I've also heard that that is happening too. Again, when it comes to the return to work phenomenon, because I agree it is a phenomenon. So a lot of the big tech companies, especially in our area, are changing their policies and requiring either full time in the office or part time. There's various business justifications that they're giving for that. I think some firms just think that their employees are more productive if they're in there in person. Maybe they believe that work isn't happening the same way it should, or their employees aren't as productive if they're working from home. I don't know, but in general, if they have a business justification for a policy change like that, it's not illegal. Obviously, it has a huge impact on the workforce, and I've been hearing a lot of different circumstances where workers are really badly affected by that because they've moved away. And generally, the rule of thumb that I give when I'm talking to people is, if an employer is allowed to make a business choice, right? That's not illegal on its face. But if it impacts a certain group of people in a protected class worse than others, then it could potentially be illegal. So one example in the return to work thing is if an employee has a disability, for example, that they need accommodation for at home, and they've been working just fine at home for 4 years, and then the employer makes a rule that they have to come into the office and that affects their disability, there might be something there.
Mm.
Or women who are women who are pregnant or on maternity leave, or folks who are taking care of a sick family member at home. You can see sort of how these policies might more adversely affect them than other people.
Yeah, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
What other ways are surveillance coming up in the workplace? Like I know with AI now, you can add note takers to your Zoom meetings or your Teams meetings. Sometimes I've been on Zoom meetings where a little thing will pop up. You are being recorded. Now it always says consent to being recorded, and you can say yes or no. So I appreciate that. But what about like these chat, the like AI features that are summarizing what people are saying in the meeting, note taking and that kind of stuff? Does that fall into any kind of like protected?
It's so interesting. I don't think the law has caught up to the speed of technology, as is most often the case, right? So there's not really, as far as I'm aware, very strong, like clear laws on exactly the impact of all of that. But I think the principles we're talking about would probably still apply. If you're consenting to being recorded, then you're consenting to being recorded. If there's a note-taking app, that might be a slightly different thing, because what we're talking about, if you and I are on a Zoom meeting and I'm taking notes of that, there isn't anything unlawful with that arrangement, right? So is it the same if there's an AI program doing the same note-taking? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you click yes to being recorded, then you're giving your consent by clicking yes.
Is there a way to opt out? Like I know sometimes when you call different businesses, it'll say, for training purposes, we're recording this call. Can you opt out of? I assume you can always opt out of being recorded. You can obviously hang up if you wanted to.
Yeah.
But is there officially like a way to opt out when somebody's asking for consent in a business setting and you don't want to give it?
Yeah, it's a great question. If the employer has a policy that they want to record people and you don't want to follow that policy, then they probably can say you have to follow the policy, right? I could see that being the position, but it's so fact specific. I really think if you think that there's weird, sketchy things happening in the workplace with you and you being recorded improperly, then that's probably a time to seek legal advice, because it is a very fact intensive area. But generally, if there's a business justification, they can probably do it, unless it's impacting you and in a way that gives rise to a legal claim separately, like you're a member of a protected class, like I said. But surveillance is a thing that's in our world in general, as you point out. What have you seen? I know that there's lots of like red light cameras and different traffic light camera. I remember I grew up in Vancouver, and we had the Olympics one year, and the Olympics were used to justify a ton more surveillance being put up in the city. And there were all of these like protests, and people were really upset about it because they were like, once the Olympics go away, we're still going to have all this surveillance around, and you're just going to be watching us all the time, and it's not going to be for a security reason.
Right.
And I know San Francisco has dealt with some similar type things, but what have you seen around that?
Yeah, we have a ton of cameras in San Francisco. I'm a proponent of them. I know a lot of people kind of have mixed feelings on whether they consent to be recorded or not. I feel like the city has tried to put them strategically in places either where there's a large concentration of pedestrian accidents
Yeah.
or vehicle speeding to try and curtail driving behaviors. Anytime you get into public transportation in a large city, I know for sure in San Francisco, you're going to be under surveillance. The muni buses, the trains, they all have surveillance on them. Anytime you're in a BART station, there's surveillance. Most of the street corners around at least the downtown area have surveillance. So it's kind of part of our normal living in an
Mhm.
urban city to constantly be under surveillance.
And where does all that surveillance go? Do you know? Like, who watches it? Who does it ever get? Does it only get watched if like a crime happens and someone reports
I
it?
believe so. I mean, I think it's technically it's owned by the city, right? It's not like a private company. It's the city's property. It's part of the city policing. So
Mhm.
I think if there were a crime or an incident or a car accident, you can do a public records request to obtain video footage, which
Mm.
we do as lawyers sometimes if we think that something's been captured, maybe by a camera. And I will tell you, cameras are everywhere. I've had in some cases, you go to an accident scene and you realize that there's an ATM across the street. There's no street cameras, but there's an ATM.
Mm.
And so you can go into the bank and ask to see the camera angle. And sometimes the camera looking out at the ATM, if nobody's standing in front of the machine, will catch the intersection.
Mm.
So I've had success at getting, kind of camera footage in really unique ways,
Mhm.
like from ATMs. Again, like I said, the muni buses have cameras on the front. I've had muni buses come by a crash scene post crash and just like, really gives you a clean picture of where all the vehicles at least
Mm.
landed post crash. You don't always
Mhm.
have access to that. So, really being creative and thinking outside of the box about how much surveillance there is.
Yeah.
If something did transpire, did anybody capture it?
Yeah. So it can be really helpful. It's like your
It can.
Matlock moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're like, I cracked the case
I totally
because
did.
of this random street camera.
Right, right. Now we also have speed cameras in San Francisco,
Mm.
which is a new thing. I think there's over 30 speed cameras in the city.
Hmm.
Again, in the areas where they have found most of the collisions, they're trying to curtail excessive speeds
Yeah.
and they're photo enforced. So they're taking pictures of license plates and drivers and then mailing tickets. So,
Don't speed.
even if you think you've got some privacy in your vehicle, and maybe people that are co-occupants in your vehicle that you wouldn't necessarily want every member in your household to be aware of. I'm thinking back to a Coldplay moment recently that got a lot of media attention.
Yeah. Well, we'd heard a rumor, and it may be a wives' tale. We're not sure if it's true, but where a gentleman was driving with his mistress, I guess, and there was a photo taken of them while he was speeding or or ran a red light or some street camera, and it was mailed to his house, and his wife saw the photo, and
Right.
that was an uncomfortable moment
Yeah.
for the family.
So I think a lot of people that are anti the surveillance and the speed cameras fall into that bucket. Like I should have a right to privacy in my vehicle and it should not be made public, although it's only really to your household, but some people have a problem with that being public to their household about who's in the vehicle.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen, again, those just started in the last 6 months or so in San Francisco. I haven't seen any legal challenges, but I know the red light cameras are in the state throughout. So
Mhm.
I don't imagine that there's going to be any challenges to the speed cameras in San Francisco.
And the folks that are against data collection, I know we were talking before the podcast about this new laws that allow consumers to clear their data, right?
Yes.
So tell everyone about those.
Okay, so the Delete Act went into effect January 1st of this year, which is great. So we all know about these big data brokers that mine our data and then they sell it to, marketing agencies. They sell it to foreign agencies. We get all these spam calls now, all these spam emails. So how do you get your data back? Under the Delete Act that just went into effect, you can go onto a single website and type in your contact information and say, delete me. And all data brokers in the state of California will have to register now under this new law. And they will have to check this database for the people that are asking to be dropped from the data sheets. They will have to drop you. They have 45 days to drop you once you add yourself to the list. So we'll drop the link for our listeners so that they know how to make sure that they can pull back their data from these big data brokers. The nice thing is it's a continuous deletion as well. So once you go on and you say delete me, because of course they're always mining data, if you happen to get back onto a broker's list, but you had already asked to be dropped, they have to every 45 days check their list to make sure they're dropping people that don't want to be part of having their data being mined, which is really cool.
That's great. Yeah.
Everyone should go to the website, fill out the information, and try and at least,
Right.
pull your data back as much as you can.
Because I'd be surprised if someone didn't want to have their stuff deleted. Like, why would you want data brokers to have your stuff? You might as well. Yeah. Good. Well, it's a new era of AI and surveillance, and all of that just keeps being more and more ramped up technology used to, collect all of our information, and from biometrics and heat. I know some airports, you walk in and your body heat is being tracked, your fingerprints, your eyeballs, like all the things. Even Whole Foods, right? You put your
palm.
hand? Yeah.
You can pay with your palm now.
Yeah. So we'll continue tracking kind of the legal aspects of this. And if there are any legal challenges, we'll continue kind of tracking those, and we can come back and do another episode.
Yeah. And if any listeners have any area in particular that they want us to dive into or do some research on to figure out whether it is or isn't legal to track and store data, please let us know.
That's the call to action, guys. Yeah. Tell us.
Super interesting.
What kind of coffee are we drinking today?
I
think we got this one from Cafe Sebastian up the street.
Oh, that's right.
Our favorite.
Yeah.
I can't remember what brand it is, but we'll drop it in the comments below. But Cafe Sebastian is awesome, and everyone should go there.
Yeah. And drink coffee among the redwoods in downtown San Francisco.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.